Her name is Sarah. She is an 8-year-old happy, vibrant kid born into a middle-income family in Illinois. Her childhood was much like everyone else's in the beginning. When her grandmother was still living, Sarah was always a happy child. When she was 4, she could memorize essential histories and quickly do her classwork. Her grandmama died when she was 5. Her story started to change after this incident. The teachers knew Sarah as a vibrant child who always beams with a great smile and a genuine hard-working spirit. She was active, playing with her mates, laughing at jokes, and making the best of everything. No dull moments for Sarah. She was a curious and passionate kid. When Sarah was 7, she returned from school one day and saw a stray dog bugging beside a tree. She took pity on the poor dog and took her home. Her dad was at home when she returned with the stray dog. He never flinched at the gesture, but told Sarah to take care of it herself, and if it died, she should bury it herself. Sarah nurtured the sickly dog back to health. She named the dog Jimmy, and this canine became a close friend to Sarah. She fed the dog a small portion of her food and moved around wherever she was. Everyone in the neighborhood called them the little inseparable duo. Jimmy was about 8 months old when Sarah saved her from the streets. Sarah's dad was an absent father, and her mom, who was never always at home, got sacked from her job due to conduct. She stayed more at home. Her presence was supposed to be great for Sarah's little charmer, but the reverse was the case. Sarah's mom is Jennifer Thompson, while her dad is Rich Thompson. Sarah's mom started to giving her tasks that were clearly beyond her age. In time, Sarah's mom warned her never to feed her dog in her presence. She said seeing her feed the dog as a child irritates her. When Sarah was 8, her mom became more frustrated. Her attitude became terrible, and she resorted to physical beatings and mental abuse. For any mistakes, the mom always reminded her that she would get the worst beating of her life if she repeated it. The day Sarah broke a ceramic plate, her mother pushed her into an electric fence, and she watched as she writhed on the ground, groaning and in agony. That day, when Sarah's dad came home in the evening, he was unhappy with the bruises he saw on Sarah's torso, but he never made any difference. He is an alcoholic and a dysfunctional father. After the weekend, Sarah left for school and returned in the afternoon. She usually feeds her dog before leaving for school, and a neighbor provides Jimmy at noon. 1 week after the electric fence incident, Sarah went to get her hair done. She didn't take her dog along because of heavy traffic and was going with a friend. When she returned, she found her precious dog dead in the backyard. Sarah cried her soul out and groaned for hours. She proceeded to ask her mother what had happened. Her mother blatantly told her that her dog Jimmy sniffed her food, so she hit it with a rod and killed the animal for contaminating her food. She killed the animal cruelly just for her cruel enjoyment and satisfaction. She has always been picking on the dog for no just cause. Sarah writhed in pain and kept hoping that Jimmy would breathe again. The poor dog suffered a blunt injury and brain damage and died. No one would have guessed the mother could do such a cruel thing to a needy pet. Poor Sarah mourned her dog and never tasted anything throughout that day. Sarah started recounting her early childhood and remembered that her mother had never said, "I love you," to her. She has never felt her arms, nor has she wrapped her arms around her mother, even to give the slightest motherly embrace. Sarah has made conscious efforts as a child to get close to her mother, but her mother kept putting her off and declining any physicals. Her late grandmother was the only mother she had. The evil woman moved from bad to worse about a month after the last incident. She became a heavy alcoholic, neglecting her child's basic needs, and made serious attempts to shun her from complaining anything to her. She always referred her to meet her father or whomever she wanted. Though a vibrant child, Sarah started to lose her vibrancy, especially after losing her pet. Her bond with this little pet was massive. She missed her pet but suppressed many emotions because crying worsened the punishments. She started feeling very scared of her mother and was never close to her dad. The dad was absent, never gave any fatherly love, and was a heavy drunkard. Hence, she wasn't close to him to begin with. Over the past few months, the alcoholic evil mother started worse psychological, physical, and sexual abuses. Sarah didn't complain to anyone because she always warned her that she would kill her the same way she killed her little dog if she complained. Sarah's mom locked her up in the closet at any slightest unwarranted provocation. Her hands and feet were bound with handkerchiefs, and she was forced to stay there for hours. When Sarah started weeping, the mother would pull out a belt with buckles and use this belt to beat Sarah in her torso, back, and buttocks. The continuous beating suffered over every minor error left scars on her body. Sarah became increasingly afraid of everything and tried reporting the incident to her daddy. When Sarah's mother got wind of this, she did the worst. As usual, her mother bound her hands. This time, she didn't leave her there to writhe in pain. Instead, she used her nails to pinch Sarah's vagina. It was so painful that Sarah was shouting. She gagged her mouth and threatened to throw her from the stairs if she kept trying to scream. Sarah's mom's face was that of a satisfied villain who tortures her enemies. After the pinching, she told Sarah that she was doing this to her because she tried to report her mother to her father. That was her punishment for daring to write to anyone. Mrs. Jennifer started having many adulterous affairs in the house, even when her daughter was around. On one of the days, Sarah returned early from school and refused to greet her lover out of annoyance. She beat her up for disrespect and warned Sarah to be submissive to her lovers. She also told Sarah that she had no right to get mad, complain, or try funny moves. She understood that she owned her and would correct her if she deemed fit. She had never hit her in the face before all these physical abuses. Sarah thought it was because she had a pretty face, but she avoided the beginning so that an outsider wouldn't notice the physical abuse. She wanted to conceal all evidence of torture and abuse. The mental, physical, and sexual mistreatment got so deep into Sarah that one of her teachers noticed a bruise on her leg. Sarah denied it and said she sustained an injury during games. During Christmas, Mr. Rich, the absent dad, got Sarah some clothes. The man didn't get any gifts for his wife. This kind gesture showed towards Sarah infuriated Sarah's mom, and she started cooking plans for it. She believed that the clothes were a mistake for Sarah. She took her to the showers and made her stay there with the new clothes while she bathed. She presented her with a nasty naked doll out of the dumpster and forced Sarah to use it as her Christmas present. She blatantly told her that she never wanted her and wished she had died in childbirth. The mistreatments continued, and Sarah kept bottling up the problems. Sarah is 10 years old, but the abuses have increased tenfold. When Sarah dumped the naked doll, she made a severe case from it. A few days after the naked doll incident, Sarah's mother humiliated her again with emotional and physical abuse. She started by threatening Sarah with fear of beating her to a stupor and repressed her with all abusive memories. One time, she hit her head with a golf club. Sarah was starved that day because she forgot to turn off the gas in the kitchen. The years of physical and mental abuse took away Sarah's vibrancy. She started feeling horrific all the time and would burst out into extreme tears when sleeping. Her life became traumatized and hellish. The abuses never stopped, even with the heartbreaking nightmares. Sarah started avoiding going home after school. She loved staying in school, even after the class, and would go home when everyone had left. The teacher in charge of her grade noticed this awkward attitude, but couldn't place many worries on it. Some lads played until it was time to leave school, hence, she didn't see it as a big deal. These horrific acts happened until Sarah was 12 years. It worsened in the past year, and the repercussions have plagued Sarah's life for the past 9 months. She entered a state of psyche limbo and had no courage to report to authorities. The abuses have been mostly indoors. but Sarah's mother started showing increasingly erratic behaviors due to her narcotic and alcohol misuse. Unfortunately, Sarah kept bottling up all their emotions and putting up a brutal facade, face, and smiles. Everyone around her never knew the hell she was in, or the pain she had been masking. She masked it very well, but her subconsciousness still disturbed her. Before the Easter season, Sarah's school usually had an annual Parents and Teachers Association meeting, PTA. Every child must have a representative. Sarah's mom was to represent her because her father had been away for about 3 months. Sarah's mother, Jennifer, anxiously wanted to be in the meeting because she feared her daughter might reveal some of her secrets during the session. In the meeting, every parent sat with their kids or wards. Sarah was sitting with her mother, but the body language was slightly off and unnatural. In attendance were some of the bigwigs in child abuse and molestation struggles. Physically, other children had that motherly warmth, fatherly embrace and love. Sarah's mom tried to put up an act, but her daughter seemed visibly uncomfortable and uneasy. Sarah was disappointed that no one could understand her suffering. She became restless because she thought her tormentor might abuse and torture her after the meeting. Nothing unusual happened during the meeting, but one of the staff took cognizance of their disjoint attitude toward Sarah. The officer for child welfare went up to Sarah's teacher and tried to inquire how she had been faring. Sarah's immediate class teacher gave positive reports on her academic performance and remarked that her grades had dropped over the past few months. The child welfare officer became curious about the cause and asked the teacher to self-examine Sarah with utmost privacy. The teacher agreed to do that and called Sarah the following day to ask her if everything was all right. Sarah wanted to open up, but her mother's threats were too heavy and knew in her mind. She was too scared to alter any sentence implicating her mother because the mom had threatened that she would murder her if she ever complained to anyone about what happened in the house. The teacher, sensing hidden dangers in Sarah's face, decided to do a personal self-examination. She called a nurse to come and examine Sarah. The nurse didn't see signs of abuse on the face region, but proceeded to explore her inner body parts. The nurse saw scar marks on her lower back region and a pinch mark on her private area. The nurse asked what caused this pinch mark. Sarah didn't respond. The teacher and the nurse assured Sarah that no harm would come to her and promised to take her out of that house if she told the truth. At this point, Sarah has gotten unique assurance and decided to open up. "It was my mother that pinched me there. That is why that place has a dark mark," Sarah said. At first, the nurse was taken aback and thought Sarah talked gibberish. The nurse was bewildered and asked for clarification again. "Your mother did this to you?" Sarah replied, "Yes, my mother did that to me and has not stopped either." She opened up and told them what had been happening. She also revealed the verbal abuse, other physical abuse sites, and the emotional abuses she has been giving out to her ever since her grandmother died. The nurse burst out into tears and went out to get someone. Within a few minutes, she returned with a team from child welfare. They came into the room where Sarah was being examined and interviewed. They took pictures of her scarred body parts and called her to join them in their vehicle. They also took recordings when Sarah was narrating stories of how she threw lamps at her, punched her stomach, pinched her down there, bound her tiny hands, and how she also hit her with a golf club once. Their faces were filled with bewilderment and anger, and they asked her to direct them straight to their house. Sarah knew that exact direction to their home, so locating it was pretty simple. The human rights activities and child welfare were bashed into the house. Sarah's mom was arrested. They searched the house, and in her possession, they also found wraps of narcotics and other contraband drugs. She was whisked away, and Sarah was taken to a rehab center. Sarah's dad was also arrested on accounts of negligence and abuse. The good people of the Child's Care Support helped Sarah get back to her usual self. A loving and wealthy family later adopted her. Following 6 months of trials, the couple was sentenced to 14 years and 3 years imprisonment, respectively. Exactly 6 years after the incident, Sarah has regained her self-esteem and now schools in a prestigious high school in the States. She adopted a pet dog named after her former dog, Jimmy. Sarah was determined and later became a speaker for survivors, CPS workers, and children's welfare units. She became a successful therapist by profession and has been putting smiles on faces of others. Her horrible history turned into a storyline of her present colorful life. She uses herself to motivate, encourage, and educate people who survived or are battling abuse. Sarah got married at 32 and now has a lovely family.
It was almost 3 p.m. The sun glared over the pier, and as the car pulled up, the tension swiftly began to rise. "You don't have the money, you get out of my car," yelled the driver angrily. This was the third or fourth time he had dealt with this particular client, and he had reached a breaking point. A distressed but masculine voice could be heard from the back seat of the car. He desperately tried to explain to Pablo why he should still be helped. "Pablo, I swear, I will find some way to pay you back when we get there. Please don't abandon me now, especially when we've already gotten this far. The end is in sight." Unfortunately, though, Pablo was already beyond the point of reasoning. Enough was enough. The passenger, Felipe, didn't have any money, so Pablo would do what he has always done with fare-dodging passengers for the past 15 years of his career. Kick them out wasn't remotely his responsibility. Pablo had kindly gotten him through the border and had also previously offered aid to Felipe and his family. Now it was time to cut ties loose. Felipe and his family, his wife Camila and their son Samuel stared blankly as Felipe drove off and accelerated long into the distance. They were now on American soil, but they owed Pablo $10,000, so they would have to continue the journey alone. The beach was lovely and picturesque, but fairly brisk due to the time of the year. Samuel started to get increasingly cold, so Camila wrapped him warm and positioned his wheelchair in a way that angled the warmer sea breeze toward him in an attempt to combat the cold. Talking to himself, he mumbled some thoughts. He didn't even realize that he was saying them aloud. "I didn't like the idea from the beginning. If I'm honest, we should have tried to find a cure for him back in our own country. Sure would have saved a pile of money." Unfortunately for Felipe, Camila had heard his mumbling and wasn't particularly pleased about it. Contentiously, she reminded him for the 50th time that they had already tried the doctors back in Afghanistan. They were great and very kind, but didn't have the necessary facilities or treatments. However, they had heard that these treatments were readily available in America, which is why they had invested so much in going there. The sheer audacity of Felipe to brush this off and complain about the chance of their son recovering was out of order. Felipe, to nobody's surprise, was depressed about this and quickly retaliated. The cracks in their relationship promptly started to deepen due to the stresses of Samuel's illness. "And look where we are now. We have no money and are stranded with our..." Raging, Felipe kicked Samuel's wheelchair, which caused it to jolt him forward, causing immense pain. Camila, much like Pablo earlier, had reached a breaking point. She understood his anger and shared the sentiment in many ways. But taking this built-up rage out on their son, who was already suffering enough, no way in hell she would let that slide. A fight began to erupt, and sensing this tension, Samuel tried his best to calm his mother down. "Don't answer him, Mom. Just leave it." "But he hurt you, and I need to teach him a lesson. Nobody hurts my son." "Mom, listen to me for once, for crying out loud. Mom, listen. I hate it. I hate it when you two fight. It makes me feel even worse. So just stop." The next few days were tense. Felipe did his best to put aside the previous anger to find a place for the family to stay. After a few weeks, Felipe just about manages to get enough money to rent out a small room/attic in a nearby town. Settling in was proving difficult, but it would have to work somehow. To try and be comfortable, Samuel lies down on some cardboard and sits with his mum, staring blankly at the rotting ceiling. Felipe would have customarily joined in with this, but his anger was still circulating within him. You never failed to keep my spirits up, but I think it would be best if I meet my end. We have tried everything feasibly possible, and continuing this endeavor is tearing you and Dad apart. I don't want to be remembered as the cause of your divorce, not after 22 years of happy marriage before I came along and ruined it when I was born. Don't you dare say that again. This is a country of peace and prosperity. There's no corruption, and very kind-hearted and good people live here. The medicine, doctors, everything. I am 110% sure that we will find help for you. When have we ever let you down? Deep down, she didn't want him to answer that, and meant it to be rhetorical. Camila and Felipe had let Samuel down so often that it was hard to keep count these days. Before he could reply, Felipe interjected, infuriated by Samuel's comments. He never wanted to hear this again. He was determined not to give up. He had gotten into debt and traveled half across the world for nothing. He loved his son and would do anything for him. Stop feeding him these lies, Camila. He's a grown-up already and understands the situation as clearly as day. We are both in the wrong, and as much as I hate to admit I am wrong, our son's life is at stake. Let's be realistic and sort this out, okay? You're a good father, Felipe. We all know that. We are a strong family, just cracked and in need of repair. I think Samuel's recovery is the perfect repair. Please, don't give up. We are close to our goal. Another long time passed, and they had finally reached a doctor's surgery. There was hope, at last, that Samuel would get better. The doctor and Camila talk for a while, but forget that Samuel is in the room. He overhears, and it upsets him because they speak depressingly. I understand your situation. We can make some discounts for you, but you have no insurance. I have already slashed the cost of the treatment in half, but I don't know if it will be enough. $200 is the absolute best I can do. I'm doing the best that I can to help. Can I please see your documents? Camila began to cry. I don't have any documents. The doctor looks and sighs. Look, I've been as upfront as possible with you. Maybe come back when you have located your documents. Little did he realize that they would have to travel hundreds of miles to find them. Camila continued to cry. Her luck had honestly run out. Mom, don't cry. We shouldn't have come here. I will die here anyway. Now we have no money, no family at all. It's all because of me. Dad was right after all. It was a rainy and bitter New Year's Eve. The night sky was starless and dim, which wasn't typical for the area. After making a stop at a local gas station, Pablo was on a drive when he pulled into a hotel to pick up a predetermined passenger. No name was given, just the address and the time. In all the years that Pablo had been cabbing, this had never happened before, and it was very suspicious to him. A silhouette got into the car, and Pablo began to drive. A faint but familiar voice pierced through Pablo's soul. He had never expected to hear this voice again. You killed my son. He looked around. It was Felipe in the back of the taxi. His face was crumpled but tense. You bastard. You kicked us out of the taxi at the border. We had no chance but to seek out the closest doctor, and he couldn't save him. If you had driven us a bit further, my boy would be here today. Pablo was equally angry. He had no intention of killing Samuel and was upset by the news. Unfortunately, Felipe was too far gone to acknowledge this or care. He had it in his head that Pablo had killed him, and now the $10,000 he owed him was the least of his problems. Felipe wasn't necessarily known for being violent, but he could do all sorts when he was pushed. He had known Pablo for over a decade and considered him a dear friend. A dear friend of the past, though. He could not forgive him for what he had done, and could not live with himself if he let Pablo live. You killed my son, and now he's gone. My life is dead, and my wife has left me. Even if she blames you, our revenge was the last thing we agreed on. You will never see that $10,000 we owe you. You will never see the light of day again. End of the road, Pablo. Wasn't friendly knowing you.
Sometimes in life, love is all it takes to do the extraordinary, and frequently, love without money is bound to end in the trash bin. Alex is a young guy trying to balance his financial life and relationship. After a very hot argument that didn't settle well with his self-esteem, he decides to work off-limit for the lady he loves. If you are not man enough, I will walk out of this relationship, were the constant words of his girlfriend. The statement keeps ringing in his head as he walks through to Mr. Joe's store in an attempt to beg him for a position in his store. After what seems to be a long thought by Mr. Joe, he finally decides to find him a space. Work started fine, and Alex could not ask for more. He was grateful to Mr. Joe for his kind gestures because, since he started making some cash for himself, his girlfriend has stopped nagging about his lack of taking up responsibilities. He doubts that his girlfriend might not be loyal to him in the relationship, but that was just by the way. His heart has chosen this lady and would continue to beat for her. He assured me to continue to do everything possible to see their work and invest in their growth. They have been together for 3 years. On a fateful day, while he was walking down to his house after a stressful day at work, the uproar of some group of bad boys who were trying to raid Mr. Joe's store stole his attention. Alex, who has attempted severally to get into the military force on multiple trials, decided to stress out his little military skills on these guys. Fortunately, he was able to save Mr. Joe's goods and even nabbed 2 of the burglars, and they were handed to the police for further investigation. Mr. Joe was surprised at Alex's braveness and admired his patriotism towards him and his possessions. Following his satisfaction towards Alex, Mr. Joe promoted him from just a worker in his store to his right-hand man, his little way of rewarding him for his loyalty. He started to favor Alex. He took him everywhere and showed him the depth of his business. Anyone could easily mistake Alex for Mr. Joe's son. After a few months, Alex's relationship begins to flourish unexpectedly. True is the saying that love is sweet, but becomes sweeter when money is involved. He starts to buy stuff for his girlfriend and pays most of her bills. Everything seems normal in their lives and in Mr. Joe's store, too. Everyone is happy. All staff now accord Alex the same respect they regard Mr. Joe. Alex was seen knocking on Mr. Joe's office door. A voice from the office asked that he comes in. He entered Mr. Joe's office. The office was massive, with many noble awards hanging on the shelf directly across Mr. Joe's office seat. That was Alex's first time in his office. According to the workers, Alex was the first staff who entered Mr. Joe's office, as he only hosts some suited men who come only once in 3 months for meetings. Alex imagines his boss as a god in human form. He is mild and always seen smiling and filled with top-notch business ideas to keep his store the best in the city. Alex has come to see Mr. Joe for something important. He wants to plead with him to show him the strategic ways he has threaded to attain this high level so he can build a castle next to his bosses. He firmly believes this will work since he loves him like his son, and he's able to gain his trust over the months. Alex was surprised when Mr. Joe told him he's always been thinking about him lately. He's been planning to involve Alex in his deals. If you decide to work for me, I will be happier because I've seen you as part of my plan. However, if you don't, perhaps that might be the end of our deals and works together, Mr. Joe said to Alex. The statement makes Alex so curious. He promises to do whatever it is, as it is a great privilege for him to learn from a business tycoon like Mr. Joe. Mr. Joe was impressed by Alex's response and determination to change his life. Mr. Joe reveals the unbelievable to Alex. He opens up to him that he is a drug dealer and has been able to amass all his wealth from the money he has made with this shady business, and he will help Alex achieve the same if he is ready to work with him. He will be willing to let Alex work with him so he can put his military experience into work and get paid hugely for every successful mission. Alex is surprised by the discovery, making him disappointed as he turns to walk out on Mr. Joe in anger. How can someone I look up to and call a mentor be this shady? He kept thinking. He went home and could not sleep. The thought of disappointment filled his heart, and he was really down that he failed to go to work for 2 days and also failed to eat anything. As a result of the disappointment, his girlfriend began to notice this in no time. She said, "Alex, I hope you have not left the work as you always do, you loser. I will walk out of your life if you resume being miserable. I'm still staying because you've been making some cash lately." She stormed out of the house. Alex was then left with the thought of his relationship going down because of his lack of decision. He will live up to expectations if he takes the deal, was his final thought as he pulls out a new pair of clothes and walks toward the direction of work. After minutes of contemplating going into Mr. Joe's office, he enters the office. Mr. Joe is more than excited to see Alex and even offered drinks. They marry while the staff is left wondering what they might be celebrating. Later that day, Mr. Joe analyzes the scope of the business and gives Alex his first mission. Alex took it up from there and went to the meeting point to deliver the work in a grand style, leaving no traces. Everything seems perfectly planned out. Mr. Joe was more impressed with the outcome of what appears to be his best mission so far. This raises the beginning of another dimension in the life of the youngster. Within a few weeks, Alex got his first car, but still decided to lay a low profile as instructed by Mr. Joe, his strong backbone. Mr. Joe has executed many people in the line of business for the growth of his own business on the call and order from the giant monster himself. Mr. Joe has created fear in him that he knows better than to try anything funny with the new beast he discovered in Mr. Joe. The penalty is death, as many have fallen in such accord. Anything for my baby gave Alex the motivation to do more. And he did not stop to shower her with gifts and money, which she still always requests as she has become even more extravagant in her spending. Something he never checkmated in the course of the relationship due to the fear of losing a lovely lady. Alex embarked on a deadly mission that might end his life, but he could not complain because he had seen what the monster himself had done to people that failed to carry out his orders. And to fight the monster, you must train yourself to be a monster. Joe was tired of the life he was forced to take out of his love for his girlfriend. He decided he was going to end his connection with Mr. Joe and would live a free man life again. After a series of thoughts and imagination, he found a fantastic way to betray Mr. Joe. He outsmarted Mr. Joe, and the monster was killed in the deal, all thanks to Alex. The question about life is always, what next? He decided to put the money he got into good use for himself, reducing everything for his girlfriend, who was of very high taste. "You piece of shit, you are so dumb, and you can never be enough for me," were her words as Alex stopped caring about her luxurious lifestyle to focus on his dreams. He stood his ground. The girlfriend slapped him for refusing to give her what she asked him. She broke up with him and threatened that he would run back to her in no time. When we work with determination, we tend to achieve the unbelievable. Alex began to pick his life from scratch and tried so hard to be a better person. Good things don't come by easily, he thought. He started a coffee shop and he employed a few professionals to work for him. He has met his girlfriend several times and wished he had her back due to his love for her. He began to wonder if he would ever find a worthy replacement. He blamed himself for pushing too hard to impress a lady that was a gold digger and promised himself the following relationship was going to be better. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. He is so much into his work that he hardly has time for himself or any woman. On a fateful evening, after a stressful day at work, he decides to take a walk around the street to his apartment. He saw a group of boys trying to harass and molest a cute young girl with blonde hair and a fantastic body. He ran in the direction and engaged the boys in a fight. He overpowered them, but he sustained some heavy blows on his cheeks. The poor girl locks eyes with Alex, smiles, and thanks him with an intent expression. Alex was dumbfounded by her soft voice. She is indeed a cute creature. He couldn't say a word. He vowed to himself that he would not search for or think about her. He doesn't want to fall victim to a gold digger again. It didn't take long for Alex to reverse his decision to search for her. After so many attempts to meet her, Alex finally got to see her again. They had a long, pleasant conversation and exchanged contact with a smile. One would wonder if they won a lottery. The young lady worked in a restaurant nearby and was doing fine for herself. Her personality and approach to matters were not unnoticed by Alex, who could not help but like her repeatedly. The two became so close that one would mistake them for a couple. Finally, he asked her out, and they started a relationship. She is respectful and also playful, a different version of his ex-girlfriend. They both work hand in hand for their future right before them. He was in his office on a fateful afternoon when he heard a knock, and to his surprise, his ex-girlfriend was seen standing in front of him, looking different, quite unkempt, and looking like a beast beat her. She explains her situation to him and begs him to take her back, but he cannot help but burst into laughter as he recounts what she made him go through. She sincerely apologized, and Alex forgave her. He gave her money and told her about his wedding coming up soon, though he had no plan for a wedding at that moment. That was his way of making her understand that he had moved on. She reluctantly collected the money to start up a new life. Even though he was over her, he could not help but pity her because of the troubles she had faced, especially how she was treated like a sex slave by the man she left him for. There was no doubt she might be affected by diseases, one that might equally end her life. The rest of the day went well, as he anticipated the nightfall when he would ask his girlfriend to marry him and become the mother to his unborn children. It went as planned, and even heaven knows he is lucky to finally find someone deserving and lovable despite his imperfections. He learns a lesson that he doesn't have to work off limit for anybody to satisfy the person or make the person stay. As a fact, love should not be based on money only. I'm glad she ended things with me. She made me find the best woman ever. He smiled as he wrapped his arms around his new girl. He pecked her on the forehead while she blushed and smiled. Things were never smooth for Jack and his mom. Jack was an artist from birth, and he lost his father when he was just a kid. He grew up in the hands of his mom in a single-room apartment. They were their neighbors themselves, as no one in the neighborhood wanted to associate with them. Jack's mom, Ms. Jane, had gone from one menial work to another to put food on the table for herself and her poor son. She often joined combined 3 works in a day to provide for his autistic son, who she had earlier enrolled in one of the best schools in the city. Her neighbors often laughed and made fun of her for being poor and having expensive taste. They talked behind her back as they were awed why she had decided to send her son to the almighty St. Hallmark's amongst all other affordable schools where her caliber often sent their kids. After several unanswered questions from these busybodies, they challenged Miss Jane about why she had to risk all that for her kid. In her words, she replied to her critics by saying, "Even though I'm poor, I wouldn't want my son to grow up in the circle of the mediocre. Growing up and mixing with the kids of the rich will help my son build a sharp mindset toward money and have a better connection that will eventually help him in the future. I wouldn't mind working all around the clock to give my son the best." Some of these critics saw some sense in the reason behind her actions, while some called her dumb and criticized her further. Ms. Jane seemed unbothered as she still ran 3 to 4 jobs to achieve her dream for her son. She had 1 full-time job and 2 part-time. She was a full-time janitress. She always resumed work as early as 6 a.m. and close around 5 p.m., granting her the rest of the day to settle down for her other jobs. Who said it was easy? It was never easy. Sometimes she missed sleep as she had to prepare for the next day. She had to take care of her autistic son and prepare his meal before he left for school. Jack was a term in high school. His experience had been terrific as he wasn't getting any fun from school. He was bullied every day by his classmates. This must have been because of his health conditions and his mom's financial status. He came from a different world from the other students. They avoided him like the plague. He tried making friends with them, but they knocked him in the head or kicked him in the ass, yelling at him to stay away from them. He soon started isolating himself. As if that was enough for these bullies, they still went for him in his isolation. They would drag him and make jest of him for being physically impaired. They laughed at him because his mom was a janitor in a small company down the road, and she had to sponsor his education with the stipends she was earning. Their teacher witnessed their callous and uncultured acts towards the poor Jack, and she chastised them for it. She asked that they apologize to him and never try such again. Jack felt so bad about the ridicule his classmates and schoolmates generally made out of him. He was pained to the bone marrow. He wanted to change the narrative. He felt so pissed with himself and concluded he wouldn't let himself remain public trash where everyone dumps insults, and for his poor mom, he was going to do something. Jack decided to go out all to make life better for himself and his mom, and at least stop being a piece of mockery, and most significantly, stop his mom from working as a janitor. That was his utmost drive. He started working. He tried to sell his services. In the bid, he became a freelancer online since he had learned some skills on YouTube. The design had always got his attention, and he breathed it. Even in his subconsciousness, or whenever he was lost in his thought, he would draw on the ground with his index finger, trying to craft a new design. His classmates called him weird for that, so he took his time to learn it extensively. He became very good at it, and his talent had just met professionalism. He started selling his skill on freelance websites and making some cool cash. He was ecstatic the day he got his first project. He couldn't hold his joy as he jumped without bothering about his condition. Tears flowed down his cheeks like a baby. You would think he was just declared the next president of the U.S. The project was just a $10 work. It was small, but he didn't mind. It was not really about the money to him, but the fact that he could get hired and paid afterward swept him off his feet. When his mom returned, he quickly ran to her and hugged her. The mom was shocked to have seen her son happy again after the tough times he had been going through in his school. She couldn't help but wonder what had got Jack very pleased, but she sure knew there was a reason behind his strange happiness. In a keen voice, she asked him, "My baby, what is it?" Jack told his mom about the good news, and he promised to make sure she stopped working as a janitor. He executed the project diligently, and he was rewarded soon. He got another work after a week. This time it was $50. He was convinced this was the pace setter for him and his mom. He pleaded with his mom to quit her full-time job while he took care of them. However, he tried to calm him to take things slowly. She would stop eventually, but it wasn't time yet. He wasn't pleased with his mom's decision, but gave in after several persuasion from the mom. 6 months down the line, Jack had been able to amass thousands of dollars. He was able to do this with his beautiful creativity and hard work. He had sleepless nights and sometimes missed school to meet up with deliveries. He didn't touch his earnings. He saved them on this trusted website. But the unexpected happened. The website crashed and he lost all his hard-earned savings. Jack became depressed. This didn't seem too good for Jack. He grew lean within a few weeks as he wouldn't eat but cry all night. His mom consoled him, but he wasn't getting all of that. All he wanted was a miracle. He wanted his money. He had too many plans for the money. That was the money he had planned to establish his mom with. He felt so discouraged. Building and nurturing a new account from scratch wasn't a quick bone to break. The market got competitive by the day. He had no access to any of his top clients again, and he had no way to reach them as they only transacted on the website, as that was the policy. The platform promised to kick back and pay up every freelancer affected by the unfortunate technical problem. Jack waited about 2 months to get a response from them, but nothing seemed forthcoming, and every action to reach out to their customer support was futile. Jack accepted his fate and decided to channel his determination towards something else. This time, he started working for a logistics company. He helped people clean up their apartments and got paid stipends, and he did this for months, even though it wasn't advisable for his health. His mom warned him to stop because of his health status, but Jack was too determined to stop her mom from working as a janitor and raise cash again so he could establish her. Unfortunately, his mom became ill. She was diagnosed with complications because of stress and the humid, filthy places she was working. She was forced to stop working as a janitress, at least pending the time she recovered. They had to keep her on medications to aid her recovery. Drugs were expensive, and hospital admission was more expensive. Jack spent all the money he had saved on her mom's health so she could be okay again. He exhausted everything he had. He had to double his hustle to keep the mom fine and save her from dying. He decided to add delivery work to his cleaning job. This time, he had to combine academics with his 2 challenging jobs. He would rush to school every morning after having a short sleep. He would leave school before the usual time to resume his cleaning. He would joggle his schedule to meet up with clients' deliveries. Sometimes he delivered late and got several lashbacks from their clients. The company he was working for had sanctioned him twice and threatened that on the 3rd strike he would be dismissed. In the run to save his mom, trying to see her mom get back on her feet, Jack faced some health problems, nervousness, and panic attacks. He was weak and vulnerable. The health problems were highly expected. An autistic guy like him shouldn't stress himself too much, but Jack couldn't help. He had responsibilities on his shoulder. His mom asked him to stop worrying about her and that she would be fine. The doctors restricted him from working. This is the end, he thought, as tears dropped in his eyes. The doctors supervised Jack for 1 week to ensure that he didn't sneak to work behind their backs. After a week, he got a bit better and returned to the company he was working for. Sadly, the company hired someone to take his place since he was absent for a week with no upfront notice. He tried explaining to them that he had been ill and was under strict orders not to leave the hospital, but they weren't patronizing him. After a lot of pleas, he had to leave there with shame. Tears had gathered around his eyes and blurred his sight as he walked like a helpless beggar. He also rammed into a car that was coming without even noticing. The man's honking at him brought him back to reality. The man cursed him and went his way. Jack couldn't even pick a fence because he was the one at fault. He walked down to the hospital where his mom was admitted. As he got to the hospital entrance, he slipped and slumped, hitting his arm hard on the floor. Immediately, he lost consciousness. The nurses ran towards him and rushed him into the emergency ward, a different ward from his mom's. After a few hours, he sneezed from his deep sleep and opened his eyes. The doctors calmed him down and assured him everything was okay. They handed him the handkerchief and his phone that had fallen off his back pocket after he slumped. He asked about his mom, and they told him she was sleeping, and she didn't even know about what had happened to him. He collected his phone. He noticed he had missed calls from his mom and a mail notification displaying on his phone lock screen, but ignored the mail. He unlocked his phone to call his mom and assure her he was fine. Having unlocked his phone, he could read the mail's headline. Surprisingly, it was from the freelance platform he was working with and had all his savings stuck in after they experienced a severe technical setback. The headline read, "Hi, dear Jack, we are back, and we are stronger." He was astonished. He quickly clicked the mail to read up on everything. Yes, it was that great news he had been waiting for. He quickly signed in, and it was accessible. He jumped up and screamed. His right arm was bandaged and healing, but it didn't matter. His scream got everyone's attention, including the doctors, and they all ran into his ward thinking something terrible had happened. He asked the doctors how much their bill was, and they told him. He assured them he would be back the following day. He dashed out, headed to his mom's ward, and wrapped his hands around her. He shared the good news with her, and she was elated too. Jack demanded a withdrawal of all his savings. The request was granted after he was able to verify that he owned the account. After 12 hours, his earnings were sent to his mom's history, which he had linked as his beneficiary. The following day, he cleared all their bills, and they were still left with a considerable amount to establish his mom, just like he had envisioned. The mom was admitted after a week. Jack resumed school and had access to his clients who had missed him. They started working together on new projects while Jack's mom quit her job as a janitor and started her own business. Jack's bullies stopped bullying him too. They were able to get a mini supermarket for his mom in a commercial area. Both the autist guy and his janitress mom lived a better and happier life ever after. I was driving my car, minding my business, much like I did every Sunday. There is a stretch of road not far from where I live, blasting down it at speed, and watching the rolling hills and waves of leaves rush as my car tires hit them. Once upon a time, this was the highlight of my week. Now, it's just an awful memory and flashback that haunts me. One Sunday afternoon, I foolishly decided to take a different route that appealed to me. I took it, and looking back, I wish I hadn't. I went just a little tiny bit too quickly, leading to me spinning out a little. It was also a damp day. The rain had finished pouring from the sky earlier that morning, soaking everything in sight, especially the road, which didn't help in my case. I wasn't as good of a driver as I had initially thought. Even worse was that on the other side of the road, there was an oncoming car, which I somehow managed to collide directly into. Unsurprisingly, the man driving the vehicle wasn't happy, as his rather expensive and pristine Ferrari had just been violently dented by my crummy Ford Focus. Being a typical 17-year-old and growing up in southern England, I couldn't do much better, which, from the benefit of hindsight, was a good thing, as if I had been going any faster, I think I would have caused a lot more damage to my vehicle. The man wanted compensation, and he wanted it fast. Thousands and thousands were demanded, but I was far from able to pay, so he had resorted to his other, far worse for me choice. He threatened to summon me to court to sort it out there. Seeing as I was too immature and poor to sort this matter out on my own, as he had put it. I knew that he could not legally do this, though, so I stood my ground, scared out of my mind, but undefeated. Nobody dares to me like that. I was more than ready to take him on until it clicked. I had barely any money and no experience, but I needed a skilled and professional lawyer. Despite the damage done by my relatively small Ford Fiesta being minor, the man made a big deal out of it, and for all I knew, it could have escalated into me receiving criminal damage charges. I knew he had one of his friends to aid him, an experienced accident lawyer who could quickly and efficiently rip me to shreds at the click of a finger. And who did that leave me with? Nobody, but then again, I was more than used to this. An orphan like myself is an orphan for a reason, after all. The one thing I had going for me was a high-quality education, and although I knew almost nothing about my area's legal system, I knew that I was more than capable of learning the ins and outs before the court date had been told. Several weeks passed, and he continued to bug me, threatening me with court dates and his evidence folder, and telling me he would wring my already struggling bank account dry. I was terrified of what was to come at first, but by this point I was unfazed, knowing that I had learned quite a bit about the legal system. The anxiety I now faced had kept me from leaving my house for weeks to come, like I was trapped out of my mind as well as in it. So all that was left for me to do was study the traffic and accident laws of my area to increase my chances of success significantly. The anxiety began to fade as I read them over and over, taking down any notes that would help me, and then picking from them what would win this case. Now, all that was left was a little more procrastinating, just a few more weeks left to find my inner lawyer, which was looking more and more likely by the second. I had always been my best friend, so seeing myself through this challenging time and coming out on top was likely. The victory was definitely in my sights. Despite all the stress of the case, I still needed to live an everyday life and maintain a standard of living. But everything was intense and complex. Even a simple trip to the shop led to a spike in anxiety. It was like everyone was looking at me, fixating as I strolled past frantically, trying to pick up my groceries while encountering as few people as possible. How did they even know that I was in a court case? What business was it to them? The day before the court case arrived, I received a phone call to confirm the details. They were surprised I would rather defend myself than have someone do it for me. Surely I would want a free lawyer. No, honestly I wouldn't. I wanted to prove that I could stand my ground and fight my battles despite my background. The sour and rich older man cackled when he was made aware that I was on my own, but that was his downfall. His wealth clouded his judgment and led to his subsequent humiliation. Before I knew it, the day of the court case arrived, and I was scared. Scared was an extreme understatement of my emotions. The man stood, towering over the podium that he was put upon. He must have been at least 6'5", maybe closer to 7 feet. Now it wasn't just his persona that intimidated me. This giant man would indeed have me beaten physically, but in the court I was pretty confident he would lose to my knowledge. I was prepared and reminded myself of this as we headed into the court and sat at our respective tables, waiting for the judge to walk in. We stood up as he walked in, though I struggled to stand straight as my legs trembled beneath me, and sat down as the case began. The judge presiding was a more prominent man, though he had quite the cruel face, and the jury didn't look much friendlier either. However, I would be fine, and by the end of it, they would surely be on my side after all the convincing arguments I had prepared for this case. The experienced lawyer stood no chance against me now. I was in my prime now. We argued back and forth, but I was no longer scared. I was empowered. I could now see more clearly the cloud of fear had been lifted. Due to this, I noticed the uproar of the jury whenever he spoke. They were seemingly on my side. As their moods changed, the lawyer the other man had hired began to look less confident and more like he was about to piss himself off as he realized he was losing. Seeing this was like fuel to the burning fire of confidence inside of me, and several times I had to hold back a smile from creeping onto my face. At last it was time. The jury began to file out of the room. One by one, they disappeared, and in 30 minutes they'd be back to tell me if I could have my life before or not. It was time for me to go on a break too. While I waited, but first I got to see the cracked caricature of the man, legs shaking and no eye contact made. He was nervous and doing a terrible job of hiding it from view. It was a sight I enjoyed immensely, very much, quite an amusing thing to see. It lifted my spirits as the anxiety I was feeling made me want to burst into tears, but the happiness helped me hold it back as we waited for recess. The minutes passed slowly. 1,800 seconds felt like 1,800,000. As the jury reconvened in the other room, I could feel my life slip past me. But when they returned, I sat up straighter, waiting anxiously for the verdict of this case. This would determine the rest of my life. I don't know how I could cope if I lost this trial. I waited with intensely bated breath for the judge to speak. His cruel face stared down at me, and he began to talk about my fate. After much debate, the jury and I have come to a mutual conclusion that the defendant is not guilty and that no fees must be paid for the accidental damage inflicted upon the Ferrari by the defendant's car. I had never thought I would win in a million years, but it was like a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I could finally relax after all this time, go out and see my friends without his army of followers harassing me wherever I went. The relief was utterly indescribable, and the joy after, as the judge told me that the man I had crashed into would have to pay me compensation for the damage instead. It was more significant than anything that I had ever felt before.